Hello and welcome to another edition of Get Motivated with Walt. Today I'm going to talk about, it's a question that I posted on my website, Get Motivated with Walt. What is the opposite of fear? That is a question that I posed. What is the opposite of fear? Seems that might be something that I'd like to know about, the opposite of fear. And I asked this question on my Facebook site, Get Motivated with Walt, and I got some responses to what is the opposite of fear. Lynetta said bravery is the opposite of fear. Nick said confidence is the opposite of fear. Dante said courage is the opposite of fear. And Sherry said spiders, but I think she meant that is something that we're afraid of. And yes, Sherry, we are afraid, at least I am. I'm afraid of spiders. Probably take care of them when they come around. Now, these are all good answers, and each of these characteristics flows from what I have come to discover for myself is the opposite of fear. And that is, faith is the opposite of fear. These other characteristics, courage, confidence, bravery, they all flow from the abundance of faith. So, what is it that we're afraid of, and how do we control our fear? Let's start with what it is that we're afraid of. A typical list of the top 10 fears are: number 1, flying; number 2, public speaking, like I'm doing right now. Lord, please help me. Number 3, fear of heights. 4, fear of the dark. Yeah, there's one right there, especially for kids. 5, fear of intimacy. 6, fear of failure. 7, fear of death. There it is. Fear of rejection, fear of spiders, that's 9, shout out to Sherry. And then number 10, fear of commitment. Did you recognize any of these fears? Maybe some of them, or maybe most of them. My fears are the social fears, the fear of public speaking, the fear of failure, the fear of rejection, fear of commitment. But what about the fear of death? That's kind of low down on the list, right? As number 7, you'd think that maybe that would be number 1. Well, the fear of public speaking, at least on this list, showed to be number 2. So the fear of public speaking is a bigger fear than the fear of death for most people. And I've seen that on different surveys as well. So it's number 7, but number 1 is the fear of flying. And why do we fear flying? All right, maybe because we're going to crash and die. And then fear of death becomes number 1 again, all over. Now, looking at that list, what do all these fears have in common? The unknown, uncertainty. Take, for example, the fear of flying. I don't know that we're not going to crash and die. All right, that's a good reason for the fear of flying. Then there's the fear of public speaking. I don't know if I'm going to look silly or maybe not know what I'm talking about or bring shame to myself. That's maybe what a lot of people think of for the fear of public speaking. Then there's the fear of commitment. I don't know if he or she is going to love me, right, later on. We fear what we can't control, but we're fine with the things that we're certain about. It is the uncertain unknown that causes so much fear. So how do we better control our fear? Faith. Faith is the opposite of fear. Now, I know when I'm afraid, when I'm having fear, or what's commonly called to nowadays as anxiety. Let's face it, anxiety is just another fear. I can tell you the physical symptoms: the increased heart rate, sweating, pounding in my ears, maybe the hair on the back of my neck bristling up. But I can't really tell you the origins of where that fear comes from. I've looked at the research, some of the research for fear. I've looked at the different phobias, they call them, different fears, self-help techniques, drugs, and therapy, the different therapies used. But none of these discussions that at least that I saw talked about the origins of fear. They just talked about how to medicate the symptoms. So I was really no closer to knowing the why of fear. But I did notice in myself that the more my faith grew, the more my fear subsided. That's how it occurred to me. That's how it's occurred to others that I've worked with, and maybe that's how it will occur to you. Faith has not been an overnight journey for me. It has seldom been for the others that I have known and worked with. And if it was for you, then great. And what you decide to have faith in is your choice. Yes, choice is a part of faith, because at some point you will be asked, pressed about your faith, and the fundamental answer will be because you choose to have faith. Faith has power. It really does. It has real power. I'm not talking about some superstition or lightning bolts or any of that, but it has real power. So let's look at some positive examples of faith. Gandhi freed the continent of India from British rule. His faith was Hinduism. Nelson Mandela, he freed an oppressed race in South Africa. His faith was Christianity. And the 14th Dalai Lama has worked tirelessly for the freedom of Tibet from the oppression of Chinese rule, and his faith is Buddhism. Now let's take a look at some negative examples of faith. Hitler conquered much of Western Europe in the 1940s. His faith was a pantheism, or a Darwinian belief in a superior race. Attila the Hun, the great Mongol, conquered much of the known world around AD 400 and practiced a Turkish-Mongol pagan faith. And then Osama bin Laden brought terror to the 20th century, and he practiced Islam. All of these people accomplished significant things, some good and some bad. If you don't like my classification of good and bad, then use your own. But the point is that the power of faith is remarkable. A fearful man never would have accomplished these things that I mentioned. So how do we develop faith? Well, as my faith grew and my fear subsided. Now, fear never entirely goes away, though. In fact, a healthy fear response is there to help keep us alive, because fire burns. All right, you learn it once, you'll be afraid to do it again. The lesson here is that we learn to live better with the uncertain by having faith. The fear subsided. Now, I'm not going to tell you what to have faith in, other than it needs to be something different than yourself. I knew a man once who told me that his faith was in a rock, and he held out his hand and handed me that rock. Now, I know that may sound a bit nutty, but it worked for him. You know, it calmed him down enough to receive other forms of counseling. Now, acquiring faith to relieve ourselves of fear seems pretty self-serving and really at odds with the concept of faith itself. But it's not. Most of the major Western religions have a tenet in there somewhere that says, come to us for relief and stay for the blessings of our faith, of what faith gives to you. So, how do we develop faith? Well, that's the hard part, or the easy part, depending on who you are. For me, it took a crisis to teach me to learn to rely on something other than myself. For others, it comes naturally. But no matter where you are, just start. Go to church. Go to different churches. Go to a Jewish church. Go to a Hindu church. Go to an Islamic church. Find what the faith that works for you. Read, pray, talk to others. But just get started. And maybe it'll be there when you need it. So, that's it. There it is. Faith. Faith is the opposite of fear. Have no fear? No, that's not practical. But when faced with the uncertain unknown, it is better to go with faith than go it alone. I hope till the next time I see you, that you keep your feet firmly planted on the earth and keep your eyes pointed up to the stars. Thanks. Bye-bye.